Hello and welcome to the Business of Betting podcast. Today I'm joined by Jason Beem. Jason, thank you very much for coming on. The Business of Betting podcast is proudly brought to you by the Betfair Hub from Betfair Australia. No matter where you are in the world, if you want expert articles from pro punters, from building automated models to betting psychology, check out the Betfair Hub. betfair.com.au/hub. Gamble responsibly. Today I'm joined by Jason Beem. Jason, thank you very much for coming on.
Jake, it's good to be on your show. I appreciate the invite.
So you're obviously the host of the Jason Beem Horse Racing podcast and race caller at Colonial Downs, Grants Pass Downs. I hope I'm getting those correct. Yep. But you do have a unique viewpoint and perspective on the overall racing and betting industry. So I'm looking forward to digging into some of that with you. How does one like yourself get actively involved in this space, in this industry?
Well, a series of fortunate events and some unfortunate events, I suppose. My dad was a gambler, and so I grew up going to the races with him. I grew up outside of Seattle, Washington, and there was a track called Long Acres that was, 5 minutes from our house. So we would go down there during the spring and summer, and just always took a liking to it. And I'm sure part of it was I loved the game, and part of it was dad time and dad and son time, and so just very entrenched in racing since I was a little kid, and they closed that track when I was 12, and so we didn't have racing in Seattle for a few years, and I kind of got away from it, and high school doing baseball and girls and all that kind of stuff, so got away from it for a while. And then my dad actually got sick in '99, and so a lot of our last year or two together before he passed away was going to the track, and after he died I just kind of kept going, and kind of stumbled into an initial job at Emerald Downs, which is the newer track in Seattle, and kind of was off and running. And next thing I knew, I started practicing calling races and got a couple opportunities to fill in and got some jobs, and now here we are.
So it sounds pretty all-encompassing then. Obviously the betting side, the horses themselves. Yep. We can talk a little bit about calling the races as well, but it doesn't sound like there was necessarily one draw card. It was the overall aspect of horse racing in general that dragged you in.
Yeah, for sure. I was definitely into the betting part initially because that was where my dad's, interest was. And so I when I was a little kid, my mom would give me $20. I'd bet $2 a race, on Sundays. And, you generally just make a win bet or a show bet or, just small stuff like that. And, I was 10, so I wasn't really a deep thinker about positive expectation and all that kind of stuff. But I was real fascinated. I wanted to be a jockey, which if you've seen me, I'm 6'4" and 350, so that wasn't happening. But as a kid, I just thought it was such a big sport. Like you could get, you didn't need a good ticket to be close to the field like baseball. You could literally walk up to the rail and to the paddock for just the charge of admission, and so it just seemed so big. Long Acres looked so big, and I was obsessed with the sport. I always liked the gambling part of it. Got more into that obviously as I got older, but and then the race calling thing. As a little kid, our announcer at Long Acres was this guy, Gary Henson, and he had this great gravelly voice. Here comes Captain Condo on the outside. His dad was a famous announcer, a guy named Harry Henson, and he kind of had his same style. But I would go home after the races, and our neighborhood was like a perfect oval. Like it literally went in a big circle. And so I would ride my bike around, and I would do the calls from that day, and I'd get a stick and would whip my bike, and here comes Sneakin' Jake rallying on the outside. That was actually one of the most popular horses when I was a kid, was named Sneakin' Jake, by the way. Yeah. But and so I was always kind of fascinated by the announcing part of it. And there was a guy named Vic Stoffer who calls at Oaklawn Park right now. He had a call in 2005 of the American Oaks, a horse named Cesario. You can still find it on YouTube. And I just thought it was like the greatest race call. Like the hair on my arm stood up, and I went and bought binoculars the next day, and I was like, I could do this. Like I've heard these guys do it. I had no broadcasting training of any kind. I just went up to the roof and practiced and kind of started emailing some announcers who I'd kind of come in contact with on various chat boards. This was the time of the chat boards, pre-Twitter and all that. And And a lot of guys gave me help, like they gave me good suggestions. And Vic actually was the one who told me that a place named River Downs was looking for somebody. And I had just called a few races at Portland Meadows where I was practicing. They were nice enough to let me, have a couple races just to give it a try. And I did okay and made a tape. And Vic told me they were hiring at River Downs. I sent in a tape and somehow got the job. And I got the job at Portland right at that next year. So I was doing those two for a couple years. I was at Portland for 10 years total. And did Louisiana Downs last year, did Monmouth as a fill-in, and now I'm at Colonial and Grants Pass. Mostly, I don't know full time, but I'm calling a good chunk of the year now.
Do you know what it is about race calling and announcing that makes it so popular? Because so many people, I'm sure, can remember famous callers, let's say, about a certain race, or even in sports, certain announcers or color commentators talking about different things. And I love Michael Buffer and Bruce Buffer and know what words they've trademarked. And it's an interesting part of the world, a tiny little corner of the world that often many people have their own perspective and coverage on, but it is many people that are distinctly interested in it.
Yeah, I think that it certainly. Vic Stoffer once told me that he said, great races and great horses make for great race calls, and I think that there's some truth in that. But obviously, you have to be ready for the moment, and there's been great moments that have happened in sports where the call wasn't all that great, but usually the biggest moments in sports or racing or whatever, like you do remember the call because it's kind of synonymous with that, whether it was some great line. I mean, the "Do You Believe in Miracles" was like, the greatest line that people associate with an event ever and will for decades to come. And so I think it's just part of that. It is a part of that experience and our memories and all that kind of stuff. I know for me, there's a lot of nostalgia with the race calling just because, it's memories of childhood and it's that distinct kind of staccato call. And now with social media, I mean, so many of the, not only race callers, but announcers in other sports, they're kind of out there a little more and people can message them and people get, you interact with folks. And I think there's a little more accessibility. It's not so much just a voice behind the curtain. Cause like growing up, I couldn't have told you what Gary Henson looked like at Long Acres. Like I never saw him. He was the Wizard of Oz right behind the curtain.
Yeah, absolutely. And what type of skill is it? I mean, it sounds obvious, and you need to have certain dulcet tones and a certain way of going about it, but it's probably an art and an art form in and of itself. Take us through what that sort of part of your career, let's say, or profession, what does that look like?
To me, the memorization part is I think one of the most important, if not the most important. And I've been in the booth with a lot of different guys. I've seen some guys who really pour over it and try to memorize the name. Like I personally use colored pencils and I color the saddle towel colors on one side of the program and the jockey colors on another side, because you kind of want to use the jockey colors as your or your main identification purpose. Because A, they're usually pretty different from horse to horse, and B, the saddle towels, when they're kind of lined up 2 or 3 in a row, you can't see them very well. So jockeys' caps and colors are the best ways. And I want to have a field so memorized that throughout the race, I don't have to look at my program unless I really want some little nugget. If I want to mention the rider, if I see him make a good move and maybe I forgot who the rider was, or sometimes you just, you might see a flash of color on the outside moving up and you're like, oh God, who is that? A lime green. Oh, it's so-and-so, so it acts as a bit of a cheat sheet helping with the memorization. But if you're not looking at the race and you're looking at your program because you can't remember the name, it's just so easy to miss stuff. It's so easy to get behind in a race, and you don't want to do that. You kind of, I don't think you want to be ahead of the race either. I really think you want to be right with it, and I think the memorization is a really, really big part of it. If you go to any announcer's booth before a race, they're just sitting there staring at each of the horses, trying to memorize, and I just think it's such an important part of that job. And there you kind of build up a vocabulary to go with different things that can happen during a race and out on the race course. And that's why a lot of times if something really bonkers happens, you'll hear the announcer get kind of perplexed because they just don't have anything ready for that particular moment. And I guess that's the same in sports too, right? I mean, I always joke that like the biggest crutch line for sports announcers is, "Are you kidding me?" Like every time I hear somebody say that, I think they weren't ready for that moment and for what happened, because you hear it from a lot of different guys. And I know a couple guys have kind of made that their trademark. And so I don't know that it works for them. But I've noticed stuff like that. I remember there was a guy named Luke Kreitboss who used to call it Churchill, and just the greatest guy. And he passed away in 2008, I think it was. But I remember sitting with him, and it was I was driving to Cincinnati to go to River Downs, my first like real announcing job, and I was sitting with him in Phoenix at the track there, and he's calling a race, and on the far turn, I noticed he would say, winding around the far turn. He really drew it out. And I was looking at him, and his eyes were looking straight down at the program. And I kind of asked him about it, and he told me, he goes, you're going to find little ways to cheat so that people don't know that you're scrambling. And, whether it's reading the internal fractions or, using a line like that. Like I've certainly done that where, I'll go, they go winding around. In fact, I'll use exactly his words. And it's like, okay, who the hell's that up there with the purple cap? That's the 7. That's canon, memories. And then you go on with it. And so it's fun to kind of learn those little tricks of the trade and stuff like that. But you're right. I mean, it's that my favorite part of it is that it is a craft, and it's something you get to work on and try to improve on and, add stuff. And it changes over the years. Like in the 80s and the 90s and even early 2000s, like catchphrases were like a really big deal. Like you had to have your down the stretch they come, or they would need to sprout wings. Like you had to have your little lines. And now, and it was like that with SportsCenter too, right? Like every SportsCenter anchor had their little catchphrases, and now that's kind of gone away. The big trend in racing announcing right now seems to be like puns of the names, which I don't really care for, but a lot of guys like to do that. But it's definitely more of I think the better callers right now are the guys who play it a little more straight and aren't trying to do anything too over the top.
Is that right? I was going to ask you about that. What is the overall intent of the race caller, and does it vary between major race days versus,
Sure.
Early in the week? Because I remember watching 'Tis the Law more recently, and if I didn't see the vision, it would have felt like it was a exciting, terrific race going on. And if I watched it on mute, it was probably pretty boring. So, that's obviously, part of the job probably is the excitement factor. But I've always, especially when I've had a bet on a horse race, I want to kind of have a race caller that knows what my bet is and what I want and what I'm looking for, and try and tell me that, which is obviously probably a long time into the future. But do you have to vary your approach by race day? Is it different depending on, if the favorite's 4-1 into evens? Are you thinking about different things?
I think it 100% changes with the day. I mean, the general consensus is the bigger the race, usually the more worked up and excited you get. I take a little bit of the opposite approach early on in those races. Usually, and part of that's nerves, right? Like, I called Maximum Security's first race after the Derby last year in Monmouth, and I knew for a fact, like, this is going to be the most watched race I've ever called, like, not even close. And I remember specifically telling myself early in the call, like, just go slow. Don't get too excited. He's probably going to win by 20 lengths. You don't want to be screaming like a banshee. So, of course, I'm going slow. And then they turn for home, and this horse, King for a Day, comes right up to him. And it's like, I had like 3 or 4 lines, written down on my program just in case. I wanted it to be very reserved because I knew it was not a huge stakes race. It was just kind of his next step to the Haskell. And then, of course, he gets beat. And so it throws everything I had planned out, and it actually made it more exciting because it was a more exciting race. But yeah, I mean, your average Thursday, 6-horse claimer on the dirt, you're probably not going to get as worked up and obviously probably as prepared and informed as you would for, the Haskell or some of these graded stakes races that go on in the weekend. But I always feel bad, like the tracks that have like one big race, which is a lot of them. If you get a crummy race, a lot of the guys will still go real crazy with, screaming and have their big lines ready and everything like that, even though the race maybe is a little bit of a dull one. So it certainly varies from person to person how they kind of want to deal with that, and their level of excitement they want to do. I mean, I really try to. I mean, I'm a little bit of a goofball on social media and on my podcast, I try to have fun and all that. But when it comes to race calling, I like to be a little more of I always say just the facts, ma'am, and try to really, because I know that, bettors don't want to listen to a bunch of shtick, and there's a good chance after every horse race that a very good sizable majority of the people are throwing down tickets that were losers. And if you're sitting there rubbing it into them, to me, that's annoying. I mean, I do think that every once in a while humor or something witty sprinkled in really does add to it, but I think it has to be sporadic. I think it gets old really quick. And I remember Luke Kreitbos, who I mentioned earlier, he told me once, he said, I always hear these guys get so excited when a 50-1 or a 99-1 shot wins, because it's exciting to see big prices and stuff. He goes, but you got to remember, he goes, 99% of the people listening to you just lost. He's like, do you want to be screaming for that 1% who of course should be happy, but he goes like, don't be rubbing it into 99% of the people out there. So I've always been real cognizant of that when a 40 or 50 to 1 shot wins. I'll state it because it's certainly the main part of the story at that point, but you don't want to be 50 to 1 shot wins, boom, stuff like that.
So what do you do in the disaster situations? I'm sure you've had at least one over the years where you lost track of things, you've forgotten names, there might be a horse that's about to hit the front that you have no idea what the horse is called or the jockey. What do you do in those scenarios?
I'll tell you what, there is no slower time in my life than when the horse on the lead, and it's only, I knock on wood, I pride myself on being really good at the memorization part of things. And last year I had really the first time I've ever called the wrong horse for a good chunk of the race. And it wasn't even a good chunk of the race. It was literally from the 8th pole to just inside the finish line. The horse was inside of another horse who was way bigger than it. So all I could see was one little swatch of blue color from the jocks. And I just said the wrong horse, and I called it the wrong horse for like 2 or 3 strides. And then finally saw the saddle towel peek out. I was like, oh God, no, it's so-and-so. And all you can do is just, swallow at them. But when there's a moment, in Colonial, we run at night, so it's a little tougher to see when they're on the turn. The lights are great and everything, but I'm 40 and my vision's just not as good as it used to be. And when there are those moments when you're searching to see who is who, it just seems like, oh my God, I'm pausing, I'm not saying anything. Who is that? Da, da, da. And then you get it, and then you listen back to the replay, and it's like a half a second, and it's never as bad as it is. It's always way worse in your mind than it is, kind of in the actual race call, because it just. To me, it seems like it all unfolds pretty fast, but I used to have a real problem with going too fast. Like, so-and-so on the outside, Colonial video going into the front, John, da-da-da-da-da. And I'd listen back and I'm like, God, I'm going way too fast. But in my head, it seemed like I was doing it appropriate. So I've always had a sign in my booth that says slow down, just to kind of remind myself to check myself a little bit. But when you're scrambling, or, a horse falls and you can't see who it is, like those times are scary, because like I said, 2 or 3 seconds away from the actual race feels like an eternity.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And the one thing I've always found fascinating, having lived in different parts of the world and listened to a lot of different race callers, is they're not only unique in certain jurisdictions, but if you pull out a race from Australia and then one in the US and then something in Europe, they seem to be totally different styles of race calling. Yep. Are you a aficionado of how things work in different jurisdictions, and have you thought about why they might be different and how they, I guess, are appropriate to the local jurisdiction?
Yeah, it's interesting because like I would say the Australia callers, they all have a very similar style. It's pretty fast paced. It's kind of one steady beat throughout. There's not a lot of kind of pauses or resetting. I always look at a race as kind of a multiple act play, right? Like if it's a mile race, there's the first quarter mile, there's them settling onto the backstretch, there's the run into the far turn, and then there's the home stretch, and they usually all kind of have their own little beat and rhythm. Usually it's a little fast in the early going because everybody's sorting themselves out. By the time they get to the backstretch, everybody's kind of found their spot, and so now you're slowing it down a little bit, which there's generation stuff too, right? Like the guys who came around in the 70s and 80s, they kind of just called a chart through the race. Like so-and-so's in front by 2. It's 2, 3 lengths back to this one, 4 lengths back to this one. There wasn't a lot of editorializing going on. And Trevor Denman here in the States kind of changed that. He was more the guy who would start to tell more of the story. And then Tom Durkin, of course, took that and ran with it. But there's definitely, and it's just, a lot of it's just influence, right? Like you grow up listening to a certain type of thing. You're going to be, obviously when you first start, you're probably going to be very in tune to how it goes. And it's interesting because I don't think that my style is really close to the people I listened to the most growing up. You would think that it kind of would be, but it just didn't necessarily work out like that. But I certainly, there's big differences between, here it's always, the foreign guys or the domestic guys, and there's certainly a big difference. But the domestic or the foreign guys who come over here, I think end up having an American cadence and style just with a foreign accent. So
it's interesting. Yeah. So as a race caller, how much do you need to know about the betting side of things? Do you need to know what's going on in the last 60 seconds of betting? Obviously in the US with the tote pools, things can change and do change pretty rapidly at certain times. Is that part of the gig, or does it depend who the race caller is and whether or not they want to have a betting component to it?
I think it depends. There's a lot of guys who I don't think watch it all that much. I will right or fully say that I don't watch the betting as much as a race caller as I do as a fan or horse player. Like, because I'm so focused on memorizing the names and doing all that, and I want to be accurate of what's happening out there at that moment. And so there's been time, I definitely want to know, of course, who the favorite is, and I want to have a pretty good idea. But I'm usually not following too closely the trends and stuff going on because, if you listen to Australia and other places like that, they'll have analysts who are talking about all of that literally until the last horse goes in the gate. Here in the States, most broadcasts don't do that. Usually the analysts are kind of off the air by the time the horses come onto the track. A few places will continue to have discussion up until the gate loads, and obviously the Fox shows and TVG and stuff will have analysts talk all the way up. But the race callers here really just it kind of your work starts when they go into the gate and it ends when they hit the finish line. There's really not a lot of commentary that's usually left for the actual commentators. So I definitely don't follow or don't discuss. I mean, I'll talk about a favorite or, if a horse is taking crazy money or something like that. But for the most part, I've always viewed my job more to tell the story of what's happening in the race, and others can interpret that, before and afterwards.
So tell me about Jason the fan. What do you get out of horse racing that isn't, a profession, an art form, a craft of race calling? Are you interested in all different aspects, from the administration through to betting through to the horses and breeding, or what things pique your interest when talking about racing generally?
I'm frustrated by the management and executive side decision makers. For me, a lot of it is community at this point, right? Like, all of my friends and colleagues and everything are in this business, and it is very much one of those things where it becomes lifestyle much more than occupation. I mean, on days off, you're still following it. Whereas, if I went to, if I was working on a production line, I'm probably not following production lines on my Saturdays and Sundays. And so, a lot of it is community and a lot of it is friends and that kind of stuff. There's certain, I'm pretty clueless on the breeding side of things. I mean, I have a general following of it, but my interest in racing has always been the betting side of things and the sport itself. But I've never really gotten fascinated by the side of the breeding things. In fact, on my podcast last week, we kind of did a little bit of a 101 in terms of pedigree handicapping, because it's just something I don't follow or know all that much about. And with the announcing thing and even the podcast, I'm a creative person. I like to write. I like to, make music, all that kind of stuff. And I really enjoy the creative outlets that announcing and doing the podcast give me. It's something to work on. It's, it's projects. It's an adrenaline rush. I mean, when I announced for, I think, 7 straight months last year between Monmouth, Colonial, and Gulfstream Park West. And when I got home back to Seattle, I remember having this real, what am I going to do for kind of my Jones right now? You know what I mean? It just seemed so strange to not have that adrenaline rush multiple times a week of getting to announce. And so it took me a while to kind of get used to, life without that for a little bit. And so now that I'm kind of back into that for the summer months, I'm trying to become a little bit aware of, of how I more constructively can replace those feelings if and when I need to.
So fixed odds horse racing might come to the US. What does that mean as I say those words to you? I know it's going to be interesting to see how it is unveiled and how quickly and what the spread looks like. But do you think that's positive? Do you think it's negative? Do you think it's a wait and see?
I mean, I'll be the first to admit I don't know a whole lot about it because we've never had it here. And so, I'm not, it's never a type of betting I've really participated in. My general rule on things when it comes to gambling is I try to learn and listen to people who are a lot smarter than I am, because I think that usually they have much more informed takes. And that's not just for betting, that's for everything in life, right? And so, a lot of the smart guys I know are not necessarily in favor for it. I mean, the parimutuel system, I think, is really awesome, and it's a neat way to betting. I don't think that, I feel like if racing had more competitive takeout, we have enough types of bets. We have a lot of interesting types of bets. I don't think we need more bets. And so, for the folks who are really singing the praises of fixed odds wagering, it's the people who get very upset when they bet a horse at 8-1 and then it goes off at 4-1 and wins, and they are getting back 4-1 instead of 8-1. And I get that. I mean, that's about the crappiest feeling there is in racing other than losing. And so, but what I worry about is, what you guys have seen on the sports side of things is it really doesn't it doesn't create a good environment for people who are winning players, because what's the incentive to take their action? I mean, the way the pari-mutuel game is right now, you want to take everybody's action and the most action, and we want the most people betting, and you really don't. I mean, the people always say, like, oh, the track wants favorites to win. The more people wins. And I don't necessarily think that's the case. I think the track wants good competitive racing and, let the chips fall where they may in terms of who wins and who loses, because, it really doesn't affect them all that much. Of course, they want their bigger players to remain in the game, but with the kind of takeout racing has, I don't know how true that even is. So, I worry about, I think everybody thinks fixed odds wagering is going to be like some great thing for racing. It's going to stop the late odds drops. You're locking in your price. And I get how that stuff's good, but I also wonder how they'll treat the winning players. And I kind of worry about that.
So when you think about your community, I know you have, plenty of close friends who are on the betting side. Mm-hmm. What are some of the things that they've been able to teach you over the years? Obviously, coming from your perspective and hearing what people who are doing it full time or have done it for a long time, what are some of the things that they've been able to impart? And I know, certainly some of the podcast episodes with Tony Zhu and guys like that, I've listened to multiple times to get their thoughts on horse racing and betting on horse racing. And it's fascinating. So I'm interested in what you've picked up along the way.
Well, I always start anytime somebody asks me about this. You were, I think you and I are actually two of the only people to interview inside the pylons, and he's a close friend of mine, and I get to pick his brain a lot, which for someone who wants to hear about gambling, I mean, he's far and away the sharpest horse racing betting mind I've ever encountered by a pole, which is horse racing term for a long way, and so it's been for me, I had a light bulb moment with him, because I mean, when I grew up, all of the teaching, everything about it was handicapping. Like that's all. It was all about handicapping and picking winners. And I mean, literally, like the book that started it all for everybody was Picking Winners by Andy Beyer. And we were raised that if you can find the winner in each race, which of course, I mean, if you can pick the winner every race, you're going to make money in this game, or at least you should. But nobody can. And even the best at it are right 35 to 38% of the time, which, by the way, is the same percentage the public is right with the favorite. And so, I grew up basically learning that handicapping was what was important. And if a horse is 4 to 5, but he looks like the winner, that's who you bet. Even if he's, should be 2 to 1, you don't even care about that. You just want to pick the winner. And as I was coming up, into my early 20s and stuff, that was kind of the early days of TVG. And I don't like to slag on them too much, but like all of their bets were basically always pick fours, and it was always, $24, $36, $48 tickets. They were all kind of structured the same way. And there was really never any actual betting theory discussion. It was just like, oh, I think the 2 and the 7 can win this race, so I'm going 2 and 7. I think the 3, 4, 8 can win leg 2. And but that was what everybody knew, and that's what everybody, kind of was taught. There was never, I never heard a discussion on ticket construction or, or EV or any of that kind of stuff until literally 3 years ago. And I mean, I'm someone who was,
You've lived and breathed it for a long time.
Yeah, exactly. And nobody ever talked about it. And I remember I was at the NHC, which is the National Handicapping Championship in Vegas, and it's a $2 win place contest. So it's really not a betting contest as much as it is a handicapping contest. In fact, it's called the handicapping contest. So, I mean, it lives up to its name. But I remember seeing inside the pylons there, and I was talking to him, and I said, how's your day going? He goes, man, this is not my thing. He's like, I don't know how to pick winners. He didn't say it like that. But he said, I'm not good at picking winners. And I go, you're a professional horse player. What do you mean you're not good at picking winners? And I remember he looked at me and he goes, no, he's like, I'm good at finding losers and bad favorites and this kind of stuff. And I just remember like initially going, this guy's a crackpot. Like, what is he talking about? And, the more I got to talk to him, and then when I did those interviews with him, you become aware that like, his entire thing is looking for good bets and good opportunities to, be against favorites and, structuring his tickets around a sequence. So he is away from where the masses are. And when he's right, he's getting paid more than he maybe should have. And, when he is right, he's really getting paid and a million other things. And so, I give him full credit in terms of opening my eyes, because I just had, my education was all handicapping is the only thing. If you handicap better, you'll win. I could handicap probably okay, just as good as your average guy. And, And yet I was getting clobbered for years because I was, playing these huge spread tickets that, I'd be playing pick fours and pick fives. And if I got lucky and hit, I'm getting 2-1, 3-1, 4-1. And it's like, those bets are really hard to hit. And if you're only getting 3-1 on them, I mean, racing is unique, right? Like it's one of the few betting games that has combinations on your minimum bet. You bet a sports game, you're betting $50 to win, 45 or whatever it is. And there, of course, there's parlays and stuff, but with racing, you can have combinations, I mean, God, you can have infinite combinations in terms of how many numbers of horses are in each leg for just that base wager of 50 cents. So a 50-cent bet, quote unquote, the ticket could be $200 and it can actually pay less than that. I mean, it is one of the few games where you can have a winning ticket and not make a profit because of the use of combinations. So it's a different, I think you kind of have to have a little different mathematical approach to it. And I was using no mathematical approach. I mean, I was like, well, my budget's $72 for this bet, so I'm going to get as many combinations as I can for 72, and hopefully I hit. And then I'd hit for, $180, and I'm sitting there thinking, God, I made $110 right there. That's great, right? And then I think about it, I go, if I could have bet on a 6-5 shot and made the same money and only had to win one race. And people, I just don't think about a lot of that because the exotic wagers, the pick fours, pick fives have become so popular. And I still see it every day on social media. And, it's not my place to go correct anybody, but on my show, we certainly spend a lot of time talking about, looking at these kind of things. I mean, I did a bit of a diatribe yesterday about, not every 2-1 shot is the same as every 2-1 shot, in a pick four or pick five. If you're betting them to win, yeah, it's the same, but it might be that one of them is, a slight favorite in a field of 12 where it's kind of a wide open race. And the other one might be, a second choice behind a 2-5 favorite. And if you beat that 2-5 favorite now in the pick fours, that 2-1 shot might actually be playing a little bit longer because so many people are going to be singled to that 2-5 shot. And so, little things like that were just not ever talked about. So I'm really glad that, that ITP kind of opened my eyes to that. And like I said, because of being friends with him, I've gotten to continue to pick his brain. And, we were doing a Zoom chat together for a lot of months during the pandemic. And, he would sit and be playing and would talk about his theories and how to look at these things. And, it's just, and Tony Joe, who you mentioned, same kind of thing. Like these guys are looking at the game through a different lens than most folks. And when they allow you an opportunity to kind of take a peek through that lens, it's really, really fascinating. And honestly, for me, it reinvigorated my interest in racing and talking about the betting side of racing, because it was like this new, it was like getting, like if you're a Harry Potter fan, all of a sudden, the author releases a 500-page brand new Harry Potter book. And it's like, I mean, how excited are you to go in there and dig in and learn about that stuff that you really just didn't have access to because you didn't know about it?
Yeah, I can hear it and feel it in your voice. And it's one of those interesting things, because I was going to ask who were the leading voices or leading faces on the betting side in the US racing scene over the last few decades. But it sounds like if that's had that type of impact on you, who's lived and breathed racing, been involved in the industry for a long time as a participant and as a fan and everything else, I wonder, or I'll ask you, what type of impact do you think ITP and Tony and others who have potentially contrarian viewpoints on betting, maybe it's better described as a more accurate way to look at gambling if you want to try and win.
Yeah.
How do you think that would be received by the masses? And maybe that can be weaved in with who were the voices and faces in the past, and is there a space for a new, fresh voice?
I mean, I get emails on the Inside the Pylons episodes. We did 2 episodes with him. One was like, just an hour and a half sit down. The other was kind of a Q&A type thing. But I mean, they still to this day get 400 or 500 downloads a month. And it's been 2 years, I think, since we did them. And so they're far and away our top episodes. And I will still get, messages from people, it really sunk in what you guys talked about and what he talks about. And, they'll send me, I got a message from a guy the other day who said, he had listened to those episodes like 5 times. And he said, I almost listened to him, like in a stalkerish kind of way. But he's a public, or he's a average income guy, right? Got wife, kids, the whole 9 yards. And he plowed a hit for 90,000 on a $70 bet. And he was talking about, one of Pylons' theorems is, kind of creating hurdles for yourself. He's like, you don't want necessarily an easy path to these big hits, because the easy path is the chalky way, and it's the way where, you're playing a huge ticket and you're not getting separation. Like, you need to have, to clear a couple of these hurdles sometimes, to have tickets that are really, really paying significantly more than they're maybe worth, and et cetera, et cetera. And, this guy had made two 5-to-1 singles and a pick 5, and he was right. And then, he had a couple spread legs where he was against favorites, and he was right. And he literally turned $70 into 90,000. And it wasn't like some crazy lucky thing. Like, they were all, 5-to-1. There was an 11-to-1, I think, a 8-to-1. Like, it wasn't anything nuts, but he just really stuck to his opinions, made a good narrow ticket, and clobbered it. And he sent this message. He's like, you guys, I'm just so thankful that you guys had, and when I say you guys, I mean, it's ITP. It's not me. I'm just the vehicle for his thought on that. But, he was just so thankful to kind of shift how he thought and saw about the game. And I get those messages all the time about those two particular shows, and sometimes just about stuff that I will take. But I always am the first to say I'm a disciple of the school of Pylons, as much as I can be. And so, I think that there is a real growing interest in that. And, I wrote a blog a while back about poker and horse racing, because in poker, I see people, they will seek out feedback on their hands, and people be like, okay, I had King 10 of hearts, flop, what should I have done? What did I do wrong? Rip me apart. Like, they actually actively seek out feedback on what they're doing wrong. And in racing, it's so much not the case. Like, everybody kind of thinks they're doing things right, and there's not a whole lot of, hey, what do you think about this? Kind of tear me a new one on how I played this early pick 4. And I actually have a buddy who has kind of started to do that with me. Like, he'll send me screenshots like, okay, I really liked this 10 horse. He was a price. How do you think I attacked this race? And I'll offer up some thoughts on it. And he's really thriving on getting that kind of constructive feedback. And it's just interesting to me that in racing betting, there doesn't seem to be a lot of that. A lot of people seem to just, think that, they know everything, or that you're a hater if you say something, what if you would have done this? Maybe you'd have won twice as much, or spent half, or what, and so it's interesting to me that racing, there is not a lot of that, where it seems like poker people are really actively trying to kind of get criticized. And when I say criticized, I mean constructive criticism about their play, in an effort to try to get better. But I think there is some of that happening in racing, and I think it's a good thing, because I think those are good conversations to have. And I think people are finding that they're becoming better players. I don't know if they're becoming winning players, but losing less is obviously better than losing more.
Totally. And I guess what made you go down this path? Because obviously you've been involved in the industry for a long time, and you said it might have been the last 3 or 4 years that you started to focus in on some of these different angles and aspects. Why not beforehand? What's it going to take for others in the industry to maybe tackle some of these questions and problems? And they don't even have to agree. I think one of the best things about some of these topics is they are contrarian. They don't have 100% hit rate, but it's worth talking about, I think, anyway. And I certainly commend you for going down that path. But why did it take so long? What was the barriers and hurdles to getting there? And do you think it's something that's going to be more longer term for you?
Well, it took so long just because I didn't know. I was ill-informed and wasn't educated, and wasn't. I certainly sought out improving my knowledge of racing and betting and stuff like that. I read all the materials that were available. They just weren't, in my opinion, necessarily, ones that I thought were all that good. They certainly didn't, lead to much benefit on my personal play back in the day. So, like I said, I don't think there was a lot of voices, because in a pari-mutuel game, another thing is it in the best interests of the sharp players to kind of open up their thoughts and ideas? Because, if anything, you're making the competition stronger. And I have friends that are professional sports bettors, and, they've said that, things are a lot tougher now to win than they were before. I mean, you used to be up against, Joe Sunday, who thought he could pick the Jets game every week. And now you're up against a lot of guys that have a lot of information, and racing's a little bit of that too, right? I mean, everybody has access to replays now, charts. I mean, they're interactive at this point. I mean, you talk to a lot of the old sharp players, and I mean, they used to have logs of VHS tapes and make their own notes and make their own speed figures. And it's tougher to win, and field size is down. The top trainers tend to dominate a little bit more. Favorites are winning more. So the opportunities are certainly tougher. I mean, you got to really, really try to put yourself ahead of everybody and differentiate yourself. And a lot of people are all having kind of the same information. So, but as far as going forward, I would hope, it seems to me that, with podcasts, I mean, obviously everybody can kind of have a platform and an opinion now. And it does seem that I don't think the mainstream folks are having these discussions as much as more of the underground. And I mean, I work for Churchill Downs. I'm not underground anymore, but but I think, people that aren't the television or the real big names, I don't think they're necessarily having the ticket construction and smart bet conversations as much, but there's a number of folks I think on that kind of next level down in terms of people that have voices who are having those conversations, who are, doing more in that arena. And I think that they're being rewarded with more listenership, loyal listenership. I mean, we've seen a pretty good increase in our downloads over the last couple of years. And to be honest, it was like our show had good growth the first year. I mean, we were doing a lot of, game shows and trivia and, a little wackier stuff and just trying to make a name for myself. But, we had a plateau of like 6 months where it just same amount of listeners every day. And then all of a sudden, a couple of years ago, we started seeing this nice uptick in growth. And honestly, during the pandemic, we've seen, I would say probably, about a 33 or 34% jump. Wow. And I've gotten a bunch of emails from people who are like, I got back into racing over the pandemic, because racing had a little bit of a monopoly, right? Yeah. For a couple of months, and even kind of still does. I mean, there's certainly not the sports betting options that there were. And people can debate whether or not racing took advantage of that at all. But I will say that I had a number of emails from people who were like, I discovered the show during the pandemic, or I kind of got back into racing. And, so, there's certainly opportunity for audience, and hopefully people are finding what I'm doing and what some other people are doing as far as talking about this stuff interesting. The feedback seems to be that they do, and I'll get emails from people who will disagree with stuff I say, but they're being respectful about it, and they're sharing their opinion. Like there's in horse racing, whenever there's somebody goes all on a race, we call it the all button. And I've always been very anti all button. And I hear from a lot of people like, well, the only way you can get a big price is using the all button. And, my theory is, if you really think a race is ripe for a long shot, and, you think that anybody can win, why are you even using the top favorites or two favorites or five favorites for that matter? Like, you're going 12 deep, and 50% of the time you're going to get the first or second choice. Like, if you think this is one of those times, it's not. Like, why are you multiplying your ticket cost by 12 if you think it's going to be one of these 5 or 6 bombs? Like, only use the 5 or 6. And but there's a real desire in racing for bettors that I've seen to be alive, to hit. And there's a lot of fear of losing, which is crazy, because it's a game that you lose at a lot more than you win at. And so I feel like everybody should be kind of used to losing part, that you shouldn't be as scared of it. But there definitely is a big fear of losing, and people will throw in favorites out of the worry of getting beat by them. And I always say, like, okay, let's say the favorite does beat you. Like, what are you really missing out on? Not much money. Unless your other two horses you love are 20-1 or 10-1 or something like that. Like, if your horses are 7-2 and 3-1 in the first 2 legs, like, are you really going to miss that much if you get the even money shot in the third leg? No. But if you win, I mean, come on.
Absolutely, yeah. And so I don't know if you get to roam around the racetracks and interact with the local fans, but if you do, what does that crowd look like? What type of person is there? Are they very much in the newspaper with a pencil circling different things and then going up to the window and probably placing pretty bad bets?
I mean, it certainly depends on what track, right? I mean, there's OTBs have a little bit more of a similar populace amongst them. The older guys that have been going out for 40 years, and yeah, I don't think a lot of those guys are making sharp bets. But like Colonial, where I work in Virginia, they have a really, really diverse crowd that comes for the live racing events, be it age, be it race, be it whatever. I mean, whatever your descriptor is, it's not. I don't think the most traditional crowd. You go to Del Mar in the summer, obviously not this year, but it's more of a beach bum, young, hip, dress up, kind of crowd. And so each track can vary from place to place. And those crowds are obviously more in tune to just playing a win bet, or a show bet or whatever kind of thing. But I would think that you can kind of tell who the groups that are really into the betting part of it and who are just kind of out there for a nice day. I think it's pretty easy to spot. I mean, they usually got their materials. They're usually focused in. A lot of times they're discussing, we had Lee Davis on the show who was on that Horseplayers show. And, he always goes to the track with his group of guys, and they sit there and they back and forth about every horse and every race. And, they're not watching the simulcasts and, looking for whatever's running next in 2 minutes. I mean, they're real in tune with what's happening on track, and they're trying to handicap out all the races and their bets. And, they're just, and to me, those are some of the best racing customers, right? The people who are just in love with it. They're there with camaraderie of being at the track, but they're there to bet and to hopefully go home with some money.
Do you have a consensus within the industry or the folks that you talk to about sports betting? And obviously as it proliferates across more and more states in the US now, is it something that's seen as the enemy? Is it something that is hopefully a crossover type thing? Or how are people in your world talking and thinking about it?
I remember when it was legalized, all of the powers that be were saying this is going to be a great thing for horse racing, which was when I knew that it would not be a great thing for horse racing. I mean, like, for instance, my company, I was actually doing my show for Bet America, and Churchill bought Bet America, and Bet America has now become more their sports platform, and Twin Spires, of course, their racing platform. So I kind of got moved over to Twin Spires, which is great because I think the brand is awesome, and I'm very proud to work for them. But I don't see a ton of overlap in terms of people who bet sports coming to racing as I do people who bet racing going to sports. I think the overlap is going to be the other way. And part of that is because obviously the juice is less. And part of it is I think sports are a little bit more of a universal thing. I mean, when I was a kid, my mom used to own a poker room in Seattle. Like, that was her business. And so since I was a little kid, I would go in there. My dad would always go in and play. And it used to be that you would go into the poker room and 50 to 80% of the guys there between hands were reading the racing form or had just been at Long Acres or were talking about the races. And now there's zero crossover. I mean, there's maybe the 3 or 4 guys who had been doing it for 30 years that play both, but the poker crowd is completely different now. I mean, they're basically a poker only crowd, but some of them still know sports, and sports are more of a cultural thing, I think. So, guys that think they know a little bit about football and are gamblers, I think there's no reason to see they won't go over and make a few bets on Sunday for the games. Whereas I think that diehard football fans are not peeking over and seeing, oh, look, they're running at Penn National right now. Let me take a handicap of this card. So I think that I don't think it's necessarily a good thing. I've heard from others that think it is, but I think it's just a better priced wagering option. And something that's just a little bit more culturally relevant at this point. I would kind of rather see racing spend its time trying to improve the betting, lower the takeout, trying to be good to our existing customers. And I think if you do that, that's when the new customers will start to come in. If new people are coming into the game and all they're hearing from the current customers is how tough it is, I don't know how eager they're going to be. I mean, like with poker, when the poker boom happened, it was because part of it was because we were seeing all these guys that were making a lot of money. I know half of them were blowing it back on other stuff, but you didn't know that. You just saw, TJ Cloutier made $500,000 last night, And so you don't see that in racing. Like, go around and, find all your friends that are winning horse players. I mean, there's more winning poker players within 5 miles of the Bellagio than there are in all of the U.S. I truly believe that in terms of horse players. And I think once we can start celebrating more people that are beating the game regularly, or at least are, doing better, I think then it will be a lot easier to bring in new people because they'll actually see people that are having good experiences with it.
Yeah, so one final question on that and bringing in new people. How do you see the next, 3-5 years on the horse racing content side, because I am an avid horse racing fan. I listen to your podcast, and that's really about it on the horse racing side, mainly because I like a mix of, I want to hear what people think about the races, of course, like everyone else, and get some numbers and picks and whatever else just for a bit of fun. But the most important part, which seems to be the least covered, is hearing from horse players, or if you want to hear from trainers, or you want to hear from jockeys, or you want to hear from administrators, or you want to hear your opinion on a lot of these things. There isn't much of that. Do you think anything will transition in that direction, or do you think forevermore will just be 6 from 4 from 3 in race 1, 7 from 2 from 8 in race, and just that type of more dry content?
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, obviously the pandemic kind of throws everything a little bit goofy because it's just hard to predict what's going to happen with anything. But I mean, I know from our show's ratings, when we have a good or interesting horse player on the show, the ratings are higher than if we have a good or interesting jockey or trainer. And that's not to say I don't love hearing from jockeys and trainers, because I do, and I think they're they're obviously a huge part of the game. But I do think there is a craving for good gambling content out there. I wish there would be a little bit more of an investment in that. And the other thing is, I mean, a lot of people who are doing the hiring, for those kind of things, they're not bettors. And so they're I mean, I see a lot of people, and I don't know if this is true in other areas, because I don't see it in poker. Usually in poker, the people that get hired as the experts are people who have pretty proven track record of winning, where in racing, a lot of the people who are hired as experts, they don't necessarily have a track record of winning. They're kind of just an expert by information, I guess, but we don't really know that they're actually out there beating the game. I mean, there's certainly nobody that I could think of that's a professional horse player that's also doing, the content or broadcasting side of things, at least that I know of. And that speaks to, one, how hard it is to be a professional horse player, but also two, I just don't know that there's people that are going for those jobs that are, qualified for that in that sense. But as far as the people who are doing the hiring, they know so-and-so has a reputation as a good handicapper, and that's, but that might not actually mean the person is a sharp horse player. They just, there's a lot of people that can go out and recite the daily racing form and what's in it and preview each race. I don't know that there's a lot of people that actually have good opinions. I was fortunate at Monmouth to work with the guy, Brad Thomas, who I think has an incredibly good opinion, but also has a good opinion about when to bet. I remember I would sit with him and do the pre-race show, and people would come up to him, "Brad, who's your best bet today?" And he goes, "Well, I don't know. I haven't seen the odds yet for the race." And they would think that he was like kind of brushing them off, when in reality he was giving them the right answer. He might really like the number 2 in the 5th race, but if number 2 gets bet down to 3-1, it's not worth it for Brad to bet it, because he thinks the horse should be 5 or 6-1, and and that's where he's going to try to make his bet. And so there are some folks out there, I think, that do a really good job. And there's by the way, there's a lot of people in racing, I think, that do a great job at broadcasting and content and stuff like that. I just don't know that we're hearing from a lot of actual experts. And I don't even consider I certainly don't consider myself an expert at betting, but I think I think I can do a good job of facilitating conversations about it.
No doubt. And that's the final thing I wanted to mention. They should go and check out the Jason Beem Horse Racing Podcast. If you're on iTunes, it's the big blue square. You'll see it straight away. Just tell us very, very quickly at the end here what the makeup of the show is, because I listen to a lot of episodes, including and especially the Horseplayer episodes, and I think this audience might be interested in a lot of those.
Yeah, we do a thing called Horseplayer Thursday, where essentially I'd say 85 to 90% of Thursdays we have a horse player on of different types too, right? Some are public handicappers, and it's more of a so it might be more of just a story of their life in betting, and then others I'll really try to pick their brains about their processes, whether they're model guys like Tony, or we had a guy on, Dennis Montoro, a couple weeks ago, who that's his whole thing. Like he was like, he goes, I couldn't tell you who Arrowgate is or who Maximum Security is. I know, what my model tells me. And there's guys that have different approaches. So we really try to, to bring as many horse players in, both just to kind of help create community, to make awareness of who I think are the most important people in our game, but also hopefully to sometimes be educational. And, a lot of times the open of the show, if I see something interesting in the betting of any track, if I think it can be a useful conversation to help people think a little more critically about how they bet and about just the world of betting, then I'll do it. But, we mix anywhere. We had Brian Hernandez Jr. on yesterday, who won the Bluegrass Stakes this weekend, which was the big race at Keeneland. We'll have trainers on all the time. We'll have broadcasters, race callers. Try to be a good mix of horse racing folks. We had a breeding segment last week that was a little bit different than what we normally do. So the beauty of having 5 days a week is I can kind of sprinkle in everything I want. And there's sometimes I'll have guests on who I know the listeners aren't going to be too thrilled about, but I want to talk to. And I really believe that good radio comes from the host being as interested and excited as the listeners. And so, sometimes you got to do that.
Absolutely.
Got to challenge your audience.
Indeed. Jason, thanks for coming on. It's been great chatting. We have plenty more topics to get to, so potentially next time we'll have to cover all of those, the road ahead for racing and maybe some of the challenges. But I know you have a long drive ahead of you, so good luck with that. Thanks again for coming on the show.
Yeah, 2,800 miles, pal. It's going to be a long one.